Your decisions follow your emotions, and your emotions follow your beliefs. This is what makes Satan so powerful. As a being, he is not actually powerful, not in the way that we tend to think of power. If you go into Revelation, when it comes time for Satan to be cast into the lake of fire, Jesus doesn't even do it himself. He has Michael go and snatch up the dragon and toss him in the fire like it's nothing. So how is it that Satan, a being that is not that powerful, has somehow managed to cause the amount of havoc that he has, to get so many angels to follow him, to get so many people to follow him? Where does his power come from? It is all in his ability to deceive. You see, as human beings, our decisions are ruled by our emotions. And if you think I'm wrong, have you ever heard of a crime of passion? Or think back to all of the dumbest decisions that you have ever made in your entire life. I bet the vast majority came at a time when you were in your feelings. But feelings aren't arbitrary. They're responding to something, and that something is your beliefs. Let's do a thought exercise. Imagine you go to the doctor. The doctor tells you that you have cancer. In that moment, you suddenly have feelings of anxiety, feelings of worry, maybe feelings of regret for things that you didn't do in your life. And then what do you do as a result of those feelings? You suddenly start calling friends and family members, people that maybe you wish you'd reconciled with. You start doing things that you had never done before, things that, maybe you wanted to do your whole life, but you were afraid to do. And now all of a sudden, faced with the prospect that you might not get a chance to do them, suddenly the risk doesn't seem so high anymore. And so you start going and doing all of those things. And so your belief that you have cancer leads to feelings of anxiety and remorse and regret and all of these other things. And those feelings lead to actions that correspond to those feelings. But now let's say the doctor calls you up and says, hey, we made a mistake. It turns out you don't have cancer. You're off the hook. You're actually perfectly healthy. You should live for another 50 years. All of a sudden, what do you have? You have feelings of relief, feelings of hope, feelings of joy, feelings of calm. And what happens? Suddenly, your actions follow. Maybe you continue to follow that course of doing all those things because that close call brought to your awareness that life is short, and so maybe your life has changed. Or maybe those feelings of relief lead you to just return to life as normal because now you don't have any type of motivation driving you to behave differently. In all respects, it began with a belief, and then a feeling that followed, and then an action that stemmed or grew from that emotion. And this is exactly how Satan traps people. He first has to go in and deceive the mind. He has to get you to believe something that is not true. But there's always a little bit of truth in the lie, isn't there? It's never just a straightforward, bald-faced, obvious lie. It's always a lie with a little bit of truth. Or the worst kind, a whole lot of truth and a little bit of lie. Just a slight deviation. And this pattern has existed since the beginning of time. Let's go back to Adam and Eve. How did Satan trick Eve? Well, he goes to Eve and he suggests to Eve that God is actually lying to her. What he's telling her about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil isn't true. That she won't surely die if she eats of the fruit. And here's the tricky thing. Most of us think that the issue for Eve was the concept that God was lying to her. But that wasn't actually what his trick, his deception exposed. See, what his deception exposed was a truth, which is that Eve had no ability to evaluate for herself whether God was lying. That's why it says when she looked at the tree, she saw that it was good to eat, it was appealing to the eye, and it was desirable to make one wise. Now, why would Eve need access to wisdom? She has access to the creator of the universe. Anything that she could possibly ever want to know, she could simply ask. The problem was that she had no ability to evaluate the answer for herself to determine whether she thought it was good or she thought it was right. And so Satan's deception was to trick Eve into believing that her being able to evaluate the truth for herself was better than her being able to get the truth directly from God. Now, if we follow the pattern, what is the pattern? We start with a belief that God is honest. God tells me the truth. What God says is right. That's the starting belief. And Satan shifted that belief from God is honest, God is telling the truth, to Maybe God is lying. Maybe I can't trust God. And then what type of emotion comes up after that? When Eve suddenly comes to the realization that God could be lying to her, and there's absolutely no way that she could prove it. Suddenly, what does she feel? She feels vulnerable. And then what happens? Out of that feeling of vulnerability, she is disobedient, reaches for the fruit in order to gain the ability to evaluate God for herself, because that, in her perception, would be the thing that would make her no longer feel vulnerable, but feel powerful, able to protect herself from someone who is trying to deceive her. This is the same pattern that he uses today. He comes to you and he lies and he says, if you don't sleep with your boyfriend or girlfriend before you get married, then how do you know you're going to be compatible? Not realizing that by sleeping with them before you get married, you are setting a pattern for your relationship that you will then have to undo after you get married. Or even worse, you are giving a part of your soul to a person that you may not be with forever, and you'll have to carry that with you for the rest of your life. He does the same thing with money. He comes and he says, God's not going to provide for you. And here's the thing. The lie has some truth in it. The truth is that God may not provide the way that you want him to provide for you. He may not provide the thing that you think that you need. And then Satan will leverage that into believing that God actually doesn't care for you and he's actually not going to provide what you need. But the problem is that as a human being, your perspective is limited. You don't actually know what you need. You just think you do. And so in that lie, there is a bit of truth. And what happens when he does that? He makes you feel insecure. And so what do? We go and we sell our souls for money in many different ways. Some of us, it's through literal sin, people getting on OnlyFans or doing things that are entirely destructive to their person in order to provide for themselves. Or others do it in more subtle ways. They stay at a job that is unfulfilling, that is beneath what God has called them to do out of fear. Or they stay in an environment that is incredibly unhealthy and destructive to their person because they're afraid that they can't make the same money going somewhere else. Every one of these traps begins with a lie, which leads to a shifting in your belief system, which leads to a change in your emotions, which leads to a reaction. This is why Paul says that we must keep allowing ourselves to be transformed by what? The renewing of our minds. Because everything begins up here. Everything. And here's the scary part. It's not as simple as just one singular deception. That's not the scary stuff. The scary stuff is when Satan can get you to create an entirely false framework where you begin to interpret everything that comes through or into your life entirely the wrong way, because one deception can produce an entire lens that you use to interpret every single part of your life. Imagine if you could convince a person that everybody hates them, everybody thinks less of them, everybody's going to try to take advantage of them, everybody's going to try to hold them down, and you could convince them of that. This one lie produces an entire framework that now every person you interact with them with suspicion, with aggression. Maybe in some cases, you enter into every situation trying to take advantage before you get taken advantage of. And what happens when you do that? Everywhere you go, you create enemies, until eventually the thing that was in your head, the belief that you had in your head, becomes the reality that you formed because you created it yourself. Now, let's say you approach every situation with the belief that people are generally for you. People want to help you out. People want you to succeed. People want the best for you. Well, what happens? You engage every person the same way. You engage other people, hoping the best for them, looking to help anybody that you possibly can, looking to support anyone that you possibly can. And what happens? You create friends. And one day, down the line, You suddenly are surrounded by people that you've helped who want to help you as a result. And so you end up creating the very reality that began up here. Now, I'm not talking about manifestation here. We have a real enemy. Satan is our very real enemy. He is out there actively trying to destroy us in every possible chance that he gets. But the thing is that we don't have to help him in that process by buying into his lies. So, to wrap this up, if you find yourself having feelings that are out of contrast with the feelings that are laid out as the product of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, right? These are actions, but they're also feelings. We can feel loved. We can feel peace. We can feel joy. All of these are attended by emotion. And so if we find that we are not experiencing the emotions that come from the Spirit, then there's a good chance that there is a deception that we might be living in. And we have to be wise to this. We have to, when those emotions come up, this is why it's so important for us to process our emotions with the Lord. Oftentimes we feel a feeling and we try to rebuke the feeling. We try to rebuke it with Scripture. That's not what we need to do. We need to process it. We need to go to the Lord and find out, Lord, where is this feeling coming from? It's not the feeling that we need to rebuke. It's the lie that we need to rebuke. But you can't rebuke the lie if you don't know what it is. And you can't replace it with the truth if you don't know what the lie is. We have to go and do the work to talk to the Lord and find out, Lord, what is the lie? What am I believing right now that's causing me to feel anxiety? What am I believing right now that's causing me to feel anger? What am I believing right now that's causing me to feel fear? When those emotions come up, we have to take them to the Spirit so that He can show us where the deception is stemming from. And make no mistake, we don't buy into deceptions arbitrarily. We love the deceptions that we buy into. Why? Because those deceptions are feeding something. The deception that if I don't sleep with this person before I get married, I won't know whether I'm compatible. Why do we buy into that? Because we want to sleep with that person. If the deception is all men are bad, all men are pigs, or the deception is that all women are manipulative, all women only care about themselves, right? If whatever the deception is, why do we buy into it? We buy into it to protect ourselves, because to live as though that's not the case leaves us vulnerable, and we don't want to feel vulnerable. We don't want to trust that the Lord is going to protect us. We don't want to go through the process of actually experiencing that pain and trusting that God is capable of healing us. We don't want to leave our life in His hands because we don't trust Him. Truthfully, at the root of every deception is a lack of trust in God. The question is always, what is it that we are not trusting Him to protect? What is it that we're not trusting Him to fulfill? And when we get to that root, when we allow the emotion to lead us to the lie, that is when we strip Satan of his power to influence our life, and we start to experience the peace of God.